My hip flexor muscles feel very tight, and I've been stretching them 4 to 5 days per week for months. Initially, it seemed to help them feel less tight, but after that, I can't seem to make any progress. Any suggestions?
Hip flexors. Anybody else have tight hip flexors?
I can get tight hip flexors.
Same.
Yeah, especially if I'm sitting a lot.
It's interesting. I had for, it was well over a year. It was about a year and a half. I was doing a bunch of traveling on the road for work. Sorry. So that was what the travel was. It was a lot of airplanes, a lot of rental cars and whatnot. And I was also trying to continue to train for multi-sport. So I was running a lot, riding a lot, and swimming a lot. And man, I get off that airplane after riding 5 hours from the West Coast to the East Coast or whatever else, and I would be wrecked. And, it's just, God, my hip flexors are so tight. And it was one side way more than the other.
Yeah, that's common.
Yeah, and I felt it like working out, and I felt it when I was done working out, and I felt it when I was getting off the airplane and everything. And also my low back was bothering me, right? And you can kind of put the two and two together there a little bit, but also sitting for that long is never good.
Yeah.
But, every time I went to the gym, right, every time I worked out, I started with some type of warm up that would include at the time some self-myofascial release stuff. For a little while, I'd be on a like just a foam roller to just kind of get to shut it down a little bit because it was so pissed off. And I stepped that up to like a kettlebell and a kettlebell handle, right, laying across the kettlebell like a smaller, like 16 kilo, like Russian kettlebell. And then it just to try to get it to shut down. And this went on forever. And then I would stretch, tons of stretch work, right, to try and get it to loosen up. And it never got better. Yeah. It just never got better. I get like some temporary relief sometimes. I could never really put my finger on like what was working. So I was just kind of throwing the whole medicine cabinet or kitchen sink at it, if you will. Medicine cabinet, kitchen sink at it to try and get it to work. But turns out it had nothing to do with how tight my hip flexors were or weren't. But that was my experience with like, my hips are tight. My hip flexors must be tight, right? Like I feel tight in the front of my pelvis and in all the time. And so I must need to stretch more. So I can relate to this one a little bit.
So, I mean, you just kind of mentioned it. I think a lot of people blame the hip flexor for the position of the pelvis or the tension they're feeling. But I think a lot more important is what's the position of the pelvis in your exercise, in your daily life, things like that. And that causes that sensation of feeling tight. So I find a lot of times, you can stretch the tissue to create length, or kind of that same thought of like in an inhibitory effect. But when you try to actually work on inhibiting the tissue through other exercises that pull you into, generally we see like an anterior tilt.
Yeah, hips are tilted forward.
Hips are tilted forward, literally like the front of your, like think of that butt sticking out kind of Instagram girl kind of thing. So when we get out of that, it's not necessarily that stretching the hip flexors will fix that, but inhibiting the hip flexors by doing things that put you in a posterior tilt, strengthen the muscles opposing to it, and doing that repetitively, and then fixing the position of the pelvis and awareness in a lot of your exercises as well. That's the thing that'll fix it more long-term. So stretching might be a part of it, but that's not the fix.
Yeah, it's just, that's where people go though. Like tight, stretch. If it's tight, stretch it, right? And I've always, just kind of ridden this line where, look, if you have tightness, then you're going to have weakness, right? The tightness is generally a side effect or a compensatory thing to being weak somewhere else. And I think that's what you're getting at there. Yes. And that, we're spending a ton of time trying to pull muscles apart and trying to lengthen or remodel tissue, which is not likely going to happen. It can help with the strengthening on the other side, the reciprocal muscles, so that those things ultimately get maybe pulled more into a position that they should be. Let's just say that length tension relationship changes so they don't feel as tight. Yeah. But this is generally a weakness issue.
Yes.
Weakness, or it's a repetitive overuse motion. So I can say that, depending on hip flexor, are we talking about the quadricep muscle that crosses?
We don't know. We don't know.
That's my question. Yeah. So like is it palpable? Can you feel it? So when you go to touch your hip, at the front, is it your rectus femoris that attaches to the pelvis, or is it deeper inside where we're talking about more psoas, more like a trunk? So, for individuals, I can tell you having tight hip flexor feeling, or it being just achy, thinking that it was tight, but for me, it was repetitive overuse. For constantly on my bicycle miles and miles, time and time again, and then going to bed, sleeping on my side with my knees tucked, my hips bent and stuff like that. And then in the morning, oh my God, it felt so tight.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of it was weakness or just overuse. And then also needing to work on my glute strength more.